Hi, everybody. It's Jenna again, and I'm here with Sandy, Daryl, and Martin to talk about work-life balance. It's probably no question to anybody tuning into this that a lot of times our working lives influence our personal lives, and our personal lives influence our working lives. And a lot of times when we talk about these things, they're constantly in conflict, or we talk about the lack of balance between them. But there's a positive side of that too, where there can be enrichment. Our working lives can have a positive impact on our personal lives and vice versa. And what we know is that when our working lives and our personal lives are in balance, this is associated with a lot of positive outcomes. People who have balance are typically more satisfied with their jobs. They have better life satisfaction. And all of these things are obviously associated with important things that organizations care about, right? Like organizational commitment and performance. So we wanted to get together and just have a conversation about what we do to encourage balance in our own lives, but also what we've seen organizations do that help or hinder this and what recommendations we might have. So open floor, all the questions are up front, ready to go. So chime in wherever you want to contribute.
Excellent.
Sounds good. Where do you want to go first?
Martin, I think, had some ideas ready to go.
Yeah, I wanted to share a frame of reference that I found useful, because for me it makes the most sense, and I think it's artificial to separate the ideas, these thoughts. And there's this wonderful poet, his name's David White, who had a profound impact on me as I went through life transitions, and he wrote a book called The Three Marriages, and I'm trying to share my screen just to show you where it is. But so essentially, can you see? So essentially, these interwoven facets of a human being, when you think about self, relationships, and work, for me, it makes the most sense to interweave them, because then time and space are integrated into a natural flow. It's not like you're separating yourself and compartmentalizing your identity. So like when you think about your relationship with yourself and coming into intimate understanding of who you are, what drives you, and what you're all about, and your uniqueness, your capabilities, and appreciating your values, you find a way to express them in the other areas of your life to live a meaningful life. And I think they are interwoven because they feed each other. These are organic, they're ever growing. And so what I try and do when I work with the executives and adults in transition and in life, as I coach them, it is to find that integration and this interwovenness, because then it's not as constrained. Then you can navigate with gratitude without fixed expectations, and where you can show up with a genuineness in each of the. I don't see them as being in conflict. I see the human imperative as an opportunity to integrate that. So if you wanted a philosophy on it, I wanted to make sure I could lead with that kind of thought process.
It's interesting. Like, I've never seen this before, but it resonates with me because I don't compartmentalize. And to me, I think particularly right now, I see a ton on LinkedIn where it's like, don't be afraid to put your out of office on and not answer. Go completely radio silent. Like, there's a movement, I think, to do that, which is, I think, fantastic for people for whom that works. Yeah. But for me, that causes me more stress and anxiety because I just know what's piling up in my inbox. I would rather scan it while I'm in the middle of watching, like during the commercials of a show, and just make sure nothing's going on. And so I think there's this idiosyncratic nature to how we approach these, that people should do what's best for them. And like, I personally am not going to ever jump on this movement, right? Like, I am going to put my out of office on, but I'm never going to go radio silent for 4 days, I don't think, not because I don't respect my time, but because I do. And I'm more of this interwoven, right? And it causes me too much stress to do that. But I know, Daryl, you have a different approach than me. So yeah, what are you thinking on this?
Well, it's thank you for sharing that, Martin. And it was interesting. I was curious on the trees if those were aspens, because I'm learning now that I live in Colorado that the aspen tree has a root system that really is an extensive network, right? So it's not just one tree, one root. It's a grove that keeps them connected. True story. A client one time said about work-life balance, okay, you have work or you have life, pick one. And that was their philosophy. So there was no work-life. Yeah. So there was no work-life balance. And they many times people want to use the word work-life integration, which, yeah, it makes sense. Work-life balance, work-life integration. And I do think it is a very personal, individualized position, because as Jenna, the way you set it up, sometimes our work gets in conflict with our life, and sometimes life gets in conflict with our work. And depending on whether one sort of tries to integrate them to a greater or lesser extent, it also speaks to trust and vulnerability, right? So I remember a former employer that I was a caregiver for a family member, and my manager almost gave me carte blanche to manage that life event. And I thought, well, there's someone who really understands how life can impact work, and their actions, their position, and their accommodations made a world of difference to me and how I managed that as well. So just recognizing that there's differences between work and life, and differences amongst ourselves and people in general in terms of how they integrate or balance. Respecting that individuality is, I think, key.
Yeah. So that manager then sounds like a different one than one I had who called me when I was in labor and who said, I thought you'd be done by now. That would be like the opposite.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Cindy, you have the best work-life balance stories. I feel like you need to flesh that one out for everybody listening, because we know it, but people listening might not have heard it before.
I think I'd like to hope it would not happen today, but I can promise you in 2001, it was a serious request. So that's probably all we need to say about that.
One other maybe point of view of philosophy, and then I want to speak about Lodestone and what I love about how we navigate this integration is that expectations are tough. You've got expectations of yourself, of how you show up and keep your commitments in a relationship, and how you show up and keep your commitments at work. And especially now with COVID, the calibration on expectations, I think we know if there's a cornerstone of trust and you have a really good fit of a person in the role, they got the capabilities and the motivation, then what leaders really have to do is just to align on the what and let people figure out the hows. There's a whole lot of trouble that we get into, and people leaders are micromanaging the house. At Lodestone, we align on the what's, the imperatives of our business, our clients, and the deliverables to them. And then if we are doing it at 3:00 in the morning on a Sunday, who cares?
That's our prerogative. Nobody's making you, right?
Yeah. And just the joy of our client successes, there are no boundaries in sharing those. I mean, we can choose not to respond to 1,000 texts that are going off and firing off at weird hours in the morning. And there's a lot of respect for that. That's fine. I just thought that what's unique about cultures that trust each other, that share the same values and goals, there's so many degrees of freedom for things to evolve and to be created, just with an affirmation of commitments and expectations for clients, and a high degree of trust in each other.
It makes me think so many times in coaching, someone will say, well, I don't know how so-and-so will react to this. And it's like, it isn't hard, actually. Go ask the question, go have the conversation. And I think that's something, I'm glad you brought up values, right? Like at Lodestone, we have a value of no BS and transparent communication, right? So if something is bothering you, just say. But it is always astonishing to me when people spend all this time wondering what is this person's why, instead of just asking the question. So, the context is important too, to understand like, hey, here's what I'm about to go do. And that's why I'm going to be completely off the grid for a while. Great.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many good points. So many good points. So we talked about like there's individual preferences, obviously, for the degree of separation between your work life and your personal life. We talked about how it's important to give people autonomy given that situation, but also maybe have some like guidelines or communication in place around those things. Yeah. So Daryl, one thing that you started to touch on that got me thinking, everything that you shared really had me thinking about how, especially in the context of people who are obviously not us, who really do need strong degrees of separation, there has to be the understanding that, there's all this emphasis on balance, but there's going to be seasons of life where, there's the scales are going to be tipped one way or the other. And how do you respond to that? How do you manage that? So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. So just to get personal for a minute. So last year, one of my primary goals last year was health. And I had to do that for a couple of reasons: to avoid back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, but more importantly, to enjoy the things that I really, really love to do. Skiing as an example. And so seasons of life, so last year was a real commitment and dedication and focus to my health. Time resources, energy resources, financial resources. And so that's what was important at that point in time, right? And so what's the next season that I'd be preparing for might require different expectations or a different way of balancing. So sometimes changes can be big changes for work-life balance. But a lot of times, working with teams that suffer from the stress of work-life balance is to helping them understand that even small individual shifts can make a big, big difference. So as an example, right, if you have a child and you want to be at their softball game at 3:30, leaving 30 minutes early to make that game is 30 minutes in a year is not a big deal, right? And so sometimes those little shifts and little changes can have a huge impact. So you can improve quality of life and have better work-life balance, sometimes with small changes, and sometimes they might need to be bigger changes.
What's interesting is the mindset of the manager versus the leader and the goose and the golden egg. I think the leader sees the life cycle and invests in the goose. And is not majoring on the minors. I think if there's tuning into a human being, they take a longer view of the human, the person in their role, with a full understanding of what are circumstances, and then have frames of reference and expectations that still value that person and retain that person with more personalization, I guess you say, more of an awareness, which is different than a managerial mind, which is focused on the micro aspects of performance management for short-term expectations with a fear and a scarcity mentality. It's a very different mindset.
Daryl, to your point earlier about the small changes, even though I tend to lead a more fluid, I'll integrate them all, I completely believe in what gets calendared gets done. And so like that softball game, I think no matter who you are, if it matters to you, you better put it on your calendar, and you better put the buffer time around to get there and not try to leave at 3:28 or whatever, right? Like we have to block those personal things into our calendar and not be shy about doing that.
I almost even think
and Jen, I didn't know if, sort of pivoting to like organizational performance. I mean, one of the things that we can do is we can measure organizational stress, right? And we know that there is a very valid relationship between the organizational stress that a team member, employee, or a work group experiences, and then the organizational performance of that. So I always say that, stress is not fun, and stress is bad for people, and it's bad for business as well. And so being able to look at work-life balance as a potential stressor and how do you minimize that potential stressor in one's life actually is good for good for business.
Absolutely.
And I think we see a lot of that, with COVID and hybrid work. I mean, we've seen a lot of this, and with generational differences, we're seeing a lot of this where being authentic in the workplace is connected to work-life integration, work-life balance. And companies are wising up to the importance of paying attention to the individual.
And to be blunt, right? Haven't we each coached some leader where the conversation is like, listen, I don't even care. Like, I want you to want this for the good of this employee, but I just, at a minimum, need you to get to, this is operational excellence. Like, this will help you with your business, even if you don't believe you need to be touchy-feely about your people. Like, there's an instrumentality to making sure people have this integration that works for the business. And it's that, I know that's a minimum threshold, but if I'm being totally honest, with some leaders, you just have to go that route and show them the, how it matters to the business.
So Sandy, it's funny when that question comes up, like, as a leader, why should I pay attention to the work-life balance of my employees? And I'll say, so that they outperform their paycheck.
Yes, that is such a good point.
And people will, right? If you're motivated, if you're interested, if you're enthused, if you feel like you can be authentic and show up to work, the vast majority of people will outperform expectations.
For sure.
Absolutely. Wow.
Jenna, you can tell we could go on and on.
I was just going to say that. I'm like, that's a really great point to end on, but I really think we could probably keep going all evening. I'm actually really curious to hear what our viewers think about these things or strategies they use in their own lives. So if you're listening to this and you have some thoughts, please let us know in the comments below. And we look forward to seeing you next time on our next vlog.
Great.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for pulling us together for this, Jenna.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.